Hello, everyone. Hello to and welcome to the 18th edition of Bend Film Festival. And thank you for watching this panel about conquering indie filmmaking with some of the wonderful filmmakers from our competition lineup. My name is Celine Sevinch, head of programming at Bend Film, and I have here with me some of the greatest filmmakers we have in the lineup. And I will introduce them now. It's Drea Bernardi is here, who's the producer of the documentary feature, The Oxy Kingpins. Liz Cardenas, who is the producer of the narrative feature, 7 Days, and narrative short film, Burros. Shauna Winslow is here with us, a director, writer, and producer of the narrative feature, The Falconer, and Therese Schechter, who's the director, writer, cinematographer, and producer of documentary feature My So-Called Selfish Life. Welcome all. Great to see you after so many months of emailing, to finally see you guys and meet you kind of in person, not really, but this is the next best thing. So I will dive right in with my questions. So I'm kind of curious about the origin story of how you guys started out a little bit. Did you go to film school? Did you not bother with film school? Did you just find your way into the film industry in some different way? And what have you found to be like the teaching lessons of film school if you did go? And if you didn't, what do you wish that you had, or you think this has kind of worked out much better for you? What are your thoughts around how you start the business and whether film school works or not? Whoever wants to go first.
All right, I'll go first.
Cool.
So I did go to film school for a couple years part-time. I was already a grown-up in my 30s and I had a completely different job, and I went back to film school part-time. I'm glad I did it. I didn't learn anything about documentary filmmaking while I was there. It was all narrative and producing and editing and things like that. And we shot on film, of course, and we cut with like razor blades. This is in the 90s. I ended up getting an internship in New York City, and I ended up moving to New York City. And then I went to the Sundance Film Festival as a volunteer. And that really inspired me to think about documentaries seriously because of the incredible variety of documentaries there. So I started interning for a documentary filmmaker. I learned very much from working with him, Mackie Alston. Really, I think I learned everything. And he actually handed me his video camera and said, here, go interview someone. And so I had to learn how to use a video camera. And that's basically it. So I'm glad I was in film school. It gave me more confidence. But ultimately, it was like on the job working with a very generous director and mentor where I learned most of it.
Cool.
Amazing.
Shauna, I think you have a film school history, right?
You have a film school history. I went to USC Film School. I grew up in Germany, despite the fact that I don't have an accent. I was born in Germany, went to school there. My parents are Americans and have lived there for 50 years, but I am 100% a foreigner despite the lack of an accent. So I actually thought I was going to study English Lit at Cambridge, and then realized that I wanted to tell stories that matter to people today, and pulled my application and applied to film schools, not knowing really very much about film. So then I was lucky enough, I got into USC, but coming from Europe where you work while you're going to school, I immediately, of course, also started applying for jobs in the film business. And so by my sophomore year, I was working full-time for a producer, and going to school and trying to juggle those two things. And then I took a little bit of a break and worked some more, and then went back and finished film school. And then since then I've taught film school. I taught a class called Reality Begins Here for a small private university. And, you know, I, I don't feel like anything I use comes from film school at all. And not having grown up with a film background or anyone in the film industry or any even knowledge of how film worked, it was like a pathway in for me to even begin to like know how to apply for internships and stuff. So it was like my on-ramp, but it was like kind of a short on-ramp. And I feel like I don't regret having gone to film school at all. But the classes that I reference and that still inspire me today are my like Russian history class that I took, or a philosophy class that was really influential. And I feel like college is this opportunity to fill up your creative reservoir with ideas that otherwise you might not be exposed to. And filmmaking is a craft. And so it's about getting your hands dirty and being in the work and learning from great mentors. I've had incredible mentors along the way. And I learned like you, Teresa, like I learned everything that I know and I use from mentors, from people like Lindsay Duran, who's like a story whisperer, Chris and Phil, who are incredible writers and directors who made the Lego movie that I was producing, or Dan Lin, who is a producer I was working for. And so those are people that have like deeply influenced me in ways that I never would have learned in film school. So I feel like it's a yes and, but despite my background, that's not where I go to for inspiration. Sorry, USC.
Is that what you teach in your classes? Like, what are you doing here? Go do something more interesting.
Like, take those history classes. I promise you'll use those later.
Liz, how about you? How was your start?
I have a very, I think, unique path. So I always wanted to be an actress. And it was a little foreign in my family. Like the arts were very important, but very much as more of a hobby. I had, my father was an international attorney. My mother was an English professor to international students. And so I thought like, hey, I will study broadcast journalism because that combines my love of writing and then also somewhat of a performance in terms of being in front of the camera. But it felt like a kind of a career, like a steady kind of career. And I had an internship at CNN and internships at TV stations. And then when I graduated from college, I was like, I don't really want to go to a small, tiny town and like work my way up. So I got a job at a newspaper in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then I got a job at the Dallas Morning News. So I was a reporter first. I was an actual journalist. But I was pursuing acting at the same time. So I started taking acting lessons, going to auditions, got an agent in Dallas. And, it was one of those things where, you just needed your story to be turned in on time and you're out of the office all the time. So I would be like, oh, I've got an interview, and I'd go on an audition. And if I booked it, I would do the same thing. And then I would just turn in my story. And I really did love meeting people and writing, but I just didn't like the controversy and the conflict, and that just wasn't my thing. And so I stopped reporting, still kind of pursued acting, and then started writing screenplays. And then my ex and I made a movie. Well, I wouldn't say we made a movie. I was just acting in the movie. It was something that he wrote and directed, and I acted in it. And it was over the course of that film that I was just like going to every meeting and showing up and was like, oh, I can get that, or I can do that. And so it was like over the course of the film, they were like, you should get a producer credit. And I was kind of like, oh, it never even occurred to me, like what a producer is. And I felt really empowered. And I love the feeling of, it was so much more than hoping someone's going to cast me or someone's going to like buy my script. And so from that project, we got distribution. And then that distributor was starting a new company that was smaller, more boutique, and was looking for family and kids entertainment. And she had said stuff with dogs does really well. And I had written a script with a dog in it because I love dog movies. I'm a crazy dog person. And so I sent her that script and she was like, this is exactly what we're looking for. So my ex and I made a series of dog movies that were like talking dog movies. And so they were my dogs. And so I literally, like, he directed them but we wrote them together. I produced them. I acted in them. I was the dog wrangler. I edited them.
Because it was your dogs.
They were my dogs, and I cast other dogs.
Oh, okay.
And they did really well. Like
from a dog trainer to a producer.
Yes, exactly.
Very interesting path.
And then it was so interesting because we were doing foreign pre-sales for these dog movies, and I was working with our distributor on like foreign pre-sales. So I was going to foreign markets, and when we did the movie, we'd have to turn it in on time. So it was like, I'm like, my first foray into making movies, I'm dealing with like delivery dates and like technical things. So I was like, this was my film school, was like making these little dog movies that were a lot of fun, but I could make mistakes to some extent. And then after we made a few of those, I was like, okay, this isn't really what I want to do. I really want to make more artistic films. This is still in Texas. So I sought out the filmmakers in Dallas that were making films that were playing Sundance and Cannes and South by. And then, so it's like I made these movies, and then I went back and just started producing for them, like short films and then feature films. And then we started working together and collaborating, and kind of like the same thing, you know, you were saying, was that learning, like having mentors. And so a lot of the things have been like the mentors in the business. And so then that's how I started really getting more success with the producing and learning from these really, really talented directors, like writer directors. So that's been my kind of crazy path where, and then the producing has been more successful, which I still love doing because I love collaborating and learning from people, but I'm still now trying to find more time for like my own like writing and directing. I directed 2 short films and acting, like those are some creative outlets. But the last thing I'll say, I know I said a lot, was I really think my journalism background, the skill set of being a reporter, I think translated to producing. And then the stuff like the writing or the acting is part of my creative outlet and my creative soul, you know. And then I kind of merge those two things because I'm drawn to authentic stories and unique points of views. And so there is a lot of stuff in a lot of the films I produce that come from that, you know, I think from that journalistic, you know, background of mine.
I love that you built like the best film school that like it's like if anyone were to build a film school, it would be like, that's like the gold standard of film school. Like you're like, this is what I need to learn. Here we go.
Yeah, and your story kind of encapsulates what being a producer is like and getting stuff done, right? Like, you know, just taking care of business. And because of your ability and tendency to do that, you were like, actually, you know, that sounds like a producer's job. And it's like, oh, okay. Moving along. And how about you, Drea?
Oh my gosh, I'm so inspired by all of you. I too have a crazy path. I went to hippie clown school. I was going to be a hippie clown actor, and I dropped out of regular college to like party and travel and then be a clown. So that was really what I spent my 20s doing. And I was dating a string of directors and producers, and I would meet them, you know, at an audition here, an audition there. And we did this one guy and I was dating him, and he lost his funding. And I was like, well, why don't we just make it? Like, isn't your buddy doing the filming? Isn't this person doing this? Don't you have the script already? Like, what, you know? And so that was like the first kind of thing. And I played a Hasidic Jew gangster in San Francisco, and I was a little nervous about offending anyone with it. So I was like, you know, anyways, but it was this moment where I was like, oh, I love this, like all of these things. And fast forward, I'm still trying to be an actress. I moved to New York to be an actress. I'm, you know, doing downtown theater, real downtown theater, like nobody's watching theater. And I started seeing all these like ads for like school, and I was like, maybe I should go back to school. Like maybe that might be the thing. And so I applied for this program through CUNY called the Unique and Interdisciplinary Studies program. And you could go to a bunch of different schools. So I went to Hunter and Brooklyn, then I landed at Brooklyn College. And Brooklyn College had this TV and radio department. It was the #1 gold standard for the East Coast back in the day. And they were trying to figure out who they were, but they had this class that was digital media production. And in this class, I made a website. I had to do a short, some sort of short. And yeah, so I had to learn how to do all these things, right? I had to shoot, I had to edit, I had to, you know, I was doing HTML, and I decided to do something that was very close to what I had been doing in my life at the time, which is I was really into like health food. And I was going to these like cooking classes with kale. I don't know how to explain it, but it was, so I did a TV show for my project, and I made a website, and I found an actress, and I got all these people together. And I had a budget, and I made my teacher very nervous, right? He was like about 3 years younger than I was, because I was going back to school in my late 20s, 30s. Like he had just graduated. He knew all the stuff. And I'm like, okay, here's my checklist, and I got this. And he's like, like, what, this woman's crazy. And I was like, why are you laughing at me? Turns out I ended up hiring him very soon after, to when I got my first job out of college.
Your teacher?
Yes. Yes. I interned for him on stop motion projects, and we became close, and he helped me with my resume. I had to do this crazy thing for this job. I applied for this job online. It was through monster.com, and it was a cool jobs campaign for Mario Batali. If you guys know who that is, I mean, he was a fantastic chef. He's a little pervy, and he's canceled, right? But at the time he was very cool, and he was on Jimmy Fallon and talking about this job. And my dad sent me a link. I applied, 50,000 people applied for the job. I get this job. And Chris, the guy that was my teacher that I interned for, helped me, like, you know, gave me notes on my sizzle that I created to get the job. And anyways, I end up hiring him. He makes me look very good. And it was the beginning of building relationships. And, you know, you guys talked a lot about mentors. For me, relationships have been every single part of this ride, right? And so I did digital media production for my first, I don't know, 8 to 10 years. I'm right at the 10-year mark right now for starting this phase of my career. And it was all digital media. So it was a lot of lifestyle, YouTube. I got to HuffPost. I'm working at HuffPost. It's journalism, it's advertising. It's a mix of all these things. It's telling stories. And I land at the Young Turks, and they are like looking to ways to reach new audiences. And I'm in LA now, and I want to be a filmmaker, right? Like, I'm sick of making these stupid YouTube videos, which, by the way, I loved, and they were wonderful, and it was amazing. And go YouTube. And I'm probably going to work there. I'm going to be working there next week. So I love YouTube. But my point is that I wanted to make movies. And so I figured out a way to like make a movie at my work. So I was getting a salary and also becoming this producer and executive producer and putting the team together and doing all of the things. And I loved what you said, Celine, about getting things done. You know, it took me a minute to realize that that was a job, right? That there is a job for people like me who are just really good at getting things done. And that's a producer, right? And the beautiful part is I'm about to start a new job at YouTube next week, working in their branded market advertising, working with creators, yada, yada, which is great because I am, you know, take care of my family, and I'm in charge, and I'm the boss. And I'm also making films in the background, right? Like, I can do both things. And sadly, we probably are going to talk about that at some point, about why we need to do both things. But it's a little bit of so to answer your story, like, I love school. I think school is, to me, it was confidence, right? But I didn't do school right out of, you know, I totally did it the backwards way. And I think that there is no straight path, right? There just absolutely, as many different people as there are, there's that many different ways to do this.
Yeah. And yeah, I feel like my film school experience was like this concentrated amount of time to indulge my obsession, where with a justification of, I'm getting a degree, okay, you know, I'm doing something important. Whereas it was more like, oh, I could just watch films and write about them and read stuff about it and stuff like that. But I'm curious though, what happened to your hippie clown dream? Is that a side hustle? Is it still part of it?
It's funny because, like, I remember talking to some professors, and they were like, kind of like, oh, it didn't work out. And I was like, it worked out. Like, it worked out really well. Turns out I am not a hippie. or a clown. Like my clown that I developed in clown school was a businesswoman. She had a freaking suit and little flip-flops. And like, that's what came out of me. And so I've actually become my clown, which I think is really interesting, because the process was so like, it was a bit like film school in the sense that it was like 100% immersive for a year. And we were in a small little town in Humboldt, and it's, people from all over the world came there, and it's called Del Arte, if anyone's curious. And it was transformative. We also studied at that school how to be an activist, right? So we had like class in, revolutions. And we took a lot of pride in the fact that like the French Revolution was started by a group of Commedia dell'arte actors, right? Because they went into the palace and then they came back out and taught everybody what was going on through theater, right? Like that was their way of communicating. And what I realized when I started doing that a little bit at the San Francisco Mime Troupe and like with the other groups of people, the audiences were so small, right? I couldn't reach the amount of people that I wanted to reach. And if you've watched my film, you know that it's like an anger machine, right? Like I want you to feel outraged at the end. And that was the same mission of the hippie clown acting, was like, you should be outraged about these things that are happening. I just wanted a bigger audience.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you say your clown persona was the businesswoman and, taking charge, which you kind of ended up embodying, but it's the kind of like a degree of separation. It's as if like a surreal thing to be, and yet here we are talking about it. That's wonderful. I want to ask Ashana and Therese, because you guys are directors, producers, writers, in Therese's case, even the cinematographer. I'm kind of curious, like how does having your hand in all of these areas, was that a choice? Was it a necessity? Does it make life easy? Because you're kind of a part of all these processes. Or is it something, I just had to do it. If I could do it again, I would just focus on this or the other thing. Like, what are your experiences around having all these hats?
Grace, do you want to go or should I dive in?
Oh, go ahead.
So I think for me, I started as a writer and director out of film school. I was hired to write a script while I was still in film school, and realized really early on, because I want to make big movies that reach large audiences, that I couldn't do it in a way that was respectful to everyone on my teams. And so I became a producer to learn how to have a lot of power and to protect myself and other people. And it was kind of like very much in that, I've been in this business now for like 15, 20 years. And it was a time where there was it was really hard. It was really hard being a woman. I didn't see any female directors around me that I wanted to be like or emulate. And I felt like if I became a producer and learned how to run the business side and get shit done, I could then tell the kind of stories like The Falconer that I wanted to tell. And so it was really truly like a means to coming back to writing and directing in a very specific way. And I had wonderful mentors along the way and like built that network of people. I think you're totally right. Is like, it's all about your community. And so much of, for me, producing is painting with people. It's building that team that is going to tell the best story. And when you see someone who's maybe not succeeding or like struggling, instead of letting them go, being able to shore up their weaknesses. And so I feel like what I do as a producer on my own projects is that I use that same skill set to take care of myself as a writer and director, right? Like I'm not Superwoman. I can't do everything. And so I have that leadership ability to build a team and also to nurture people on my teams. So all that to say, when I came back to writing and directing, I don't see myself as much of a producer anymore in the same way. Like I'm currently producing a doc, which I'm experimenting to see if it's something that I can do kind of from a distance. And I don't know, like the jury's kind of out for me, but I had David Jacobson, who is an amazing producer who produced The Butler, who as my producer on The Falconer, and Dana Ballou, who is an incredible producer who's now starting to direct as well, who was nominated for an Emmy on her show on Trafficked. And so I had a team of people that I really, truly trust as producers to have my back. And so in a lot of ways on The Falconer, specifically, my producing background was a means to be able to artistically hit the budget. We had very little money to make the movie. And so I was able to, with Adam, my co-writer and co-director, we were able, and he comes from a documentary background, so a very different background than mine. We were able to be on set and truly like write towards what the resources that we had to artistically deliver on the scenes. And that's something that I think I wouldn't have been able to do in that same way without my producing background. I'm doing a rewrite right now for Netflix where they're greenlit. They're going into production like February. And so, but I'm able to rewrite towards the closing window of what is possible while truly taking all of the artistic merit of this project and bringing it to life and elevating it and making sure that the characters sing and doing all that work of an artist while being, I think, a great partner to the studio and to the producers on the project. So I feel like my producing today is less of like being the protector and the person who gets stuff done, who has that idea and then hires the team slowly but surely. And instead I have these ideas and then I'm able to build a team around it, or I come onto someone else's idea and I'm able to use, knowing how a movie works from idea to release, I'm able to use that in service of the whole, from the vantage point as a writer and director. So it's more that my producing serves my writing, directing, versus like on The Falconer, to be really frank, I didn't run the budget. I wasn't in producerial meetings. Like I didn't have to deal with any of the things that like that superpower skill set to make. I think a producer's job is a movie, David says this really well, is every movie wants to unmake itself at every single point. And like, as a producer, you're like holding it together. And like, I feel like I don't do that in that same way anymore. I find producers who I trust, who are like holding it together. And then I hope that I like help make a beautiful picture in that frame. But I'm not really the frame in quite the same way anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. But your experience with all of that kind of help each other.
They totally coexist. Like they fully like work in harmony. And I think I'm a great empathetic director to work with because of my producing background. I know how hard it is. And like when someone comes to me and is like, we have this problem, like I've worked with so many directors that see their producers or the studio as the enemy. And for me, as my producers in the studio are my best partners and friends. And I feel like the more clearly defined the creative frame is, or the box, the budget box, the time box, whatever it is like, as an artist, you can fill that with like so much amazing stuff as long as that box is clear. And so I think my producing background, if anything, makes me a way better partner on projects, because I want to do the impossible, but I want to do it in the way that like comes in on time, where we wrap after like we didn't run. There were 2 days that we went over 10 hours at all on The Falconer, and it was a crazy production, but it was because I knew what I needed to get and I knew how to get it, and I knew how much the crew was putting into it, and I knew what our numbers. I didn't actually know what our numbers were, but I knew roughly what my job was, and I could deliver it as a good partner. So I think if anything, I'm a better friend to my producers and to the studios. And I love being called in to problem solve things. Cause like, I can be an asset in that way.
Cool. How about you, Therese?
Well, I think that I am sort of the multi-hyphenate out of a necessity, honestly. When I made my first documentary, which was I Was a Teenage Feminist, it grew out of a class I was in, and the class was basically, we learned how to write a proposal for a film that no one ever expected us to make. It was just a proposal, and my instructor, who ended up being my mentor, said, "Oh, you need to make this film." And I was like, I don't know how to he said, no, really, you need to make this film. And that's when he handed me the camera and he said, go interview somebody and see if you fall down that rabbit hole, which I did like immediately. So I just started making this film. So I was completely new at this, and I just became my producer by default, I guess. I didn't even consciously think of like, that's my job. I was the only one. So I was trying to get things done on different fronts. And part of that was producing.
Do you wish to continue in that way? Or if you could help it, you would find yourself a producer, or would you stay as a producer? And like, what role do you feel closest to in your skill set and experience and desire, I guess?
I feel by far closest to being a director, by far. But I'm a pretty good producer, I'll tell you, because I've been producing all my stuff. I'm okay at it. And I have tried to find other producers to work with. I've had sort of like co-producers, but I'm still doing sort of the bulk of the fundraising and the, all of that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a control freak, but I would like help. I would love, actually, I was thinking when we were finishing the film and dealing with the post house, and there were like a million things about finishing in 4K, and I don't want to, deal with it. And I kept thinking, wow, some people have producers that like do some of this stuff, and I don't have to do everything. And I was really sort of fantasizing about like actually having a producer and being able to focus on being a director and writer. So I don't know how to answer that question really, because it would have to be the right person, right? You want to find the person who is as excited as you are about making the film. Sometimes producers come on if you've raised your money, for example, or if they think you have a surefire, bankable documentary. It's not always that easy, really, to find someone who's just going to sort of leap with you into the abyss and like see what happens. The cinematographer part of it, though, I should not be a cinematographer. Like, I don't think anyone should ever consider like hiring me for that job. Again, out of necessity, I was shooting a lot of stuff for my first documentary and then a bit less for subsequent documentaries. And with my so-called selfish life, which is here, I did still shoot some things because it had to be shot like right away, and I couldn't like get anything together. But by far, it was being shot by professional cinematographers, and especially Iris Ng, who I think is just like a genius. And she shot a little bit over half the film, I would say. So yeah, I do shoot, but it's always better if I don't. It's better if somebody else does it.
And in your case in particular, do you want to stick with documentaries? Is that where your like interests and lie mainly, or
yeah, absolutely.
Or is it like both of those things you'd like to pursue? I'm curious.
Like narrative?
Yeah.
I did narrative exclusively in school. And which kind of convinced me a little bit that I wasn't a good, a great narrative filmmaker. I was much more excited about like digging into something that I felt really strongly about, and as an activist filmmaker, and really trying to create something out of that, from something real, something that was going on in my life, for example, as a woman in the 21st century in the United States. So yeah, documentary is definitely where my heart is, by far. I could help someone make a narrative film because I know more about producing now. So I could probably help produce something, but I don't write fiction. I don't do any of that.
You don't think in those terms?
I really don't. I respond to questions I have that I want to answer, and lies I see that I want to debunk, and people who are really fascinating who I want to put on screen. And that's the kind of stuff that I really live for, honestly.
There is a lot of, I guess, intersection in all of your work, really, in terms of like what's going on now. whether it's a documentary or feature. And like The Falconer has that cinema verite vibe, maybe because of Adam's also a contribution as a documentary maker, as you mentioned. 7 Days is like kind of like a documentation, a representation of what's happening right now in relationships, in connections. Drea, you make documentaries. I'm curious about like how do these two ways of thinking and seeing and telling stories help each other for you? And maybe Drea also, like, do you want to make narratives, or do you get inspired by narrative filmmaking
Sorry,
I mean,
I love this question so much. And I loved your answer, Therese, because I actually started the last few months, I've been interviewing friends in the business and asking them, how did you pick? Like, how did you pick? You went to film school. How did you pick to be a great documentary editor, right? One of my collaborators, Jeremy Stolberg, is brilliant. He makes documentaries. He's an editor. People hire him. He's always booked. And he went to NYU Film School. And I was so curious about, like, how did this happen? Because in film school, you do narratives, right? Like, that's what he said. He's like, I did narratives. And so, yes, I am curious about I like have this desire, because of my background, to want to do fiction and fictionalized storytelling. But at the same time, the process of making a documentary feels somehow so much more, I don't know. It's what I've been doing in my life all the time, right? It's like living life, talking to people, and then becoming curious about stories that are happening in the world. But I do believe that they're just as powerful. I mean, oh my gosh, Minnie Mouse just told me what time it is. I thought I told her to be quiet. Sorry about that. Anyways, so the answer is yes. Like, I have a deep curiosity for both sides. And I question that. I really, like, as independent filmmakers, I feel like, I don't know. I think that the wind is a part of my, it's like opportunity and what happens right here and where the funding magically comes from and the conversations and the people and how things just start to happen. And I've really allowed just the path and just showing up and just like, okay, what am I going to do today? And it's like, I'm going to be like in this field and less, determined in one direction. And I feel like, that's just where I am today. Who knows? Like, I want to direct. When you said you were a director and not a producer and an empathetic director, I was like, yes, girl. Yes. Like, but I do. And I think it's hard sometimes to be able to say that, like, I have a hard time saying I want to direct, because.
Oh, sorry. Continue.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
I don't know. I said because, but I don't know what the because is about. I mean, I've done tons of therapy and talking and, life work and writing and trying to figure out why the heck it's so hard for me to just like do that. Right. And I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Why do we do what we do? I'm often, how do we end up here? Liz, I wanted to also like ask you, because you have come from a journalistic and reporting background, but you almost exclusively make narratives now. Like, how do you find the connection?
I know, I think your question was so interesting, and I've loved all of the answers. And I do love how there's so many similarities in different ways with all of us. Very inspiring. Because to me, I guess maybe it's because of starting from a acting and maybe writing characters, that like I was even thinking about. So the first short film that I wrote and directed, I also acted in, and it played Bend. So Bend has a special place in my heart because it was the first thing that I wrote.
Yes, I remember you saying, right.
Yeah. And basically I was a caregiver to my parents. And so my short film was about the day in the life of a caregiver. And I shot it like at my house with my dad's, like my dad's like hospital bed and equipment. And it was a thing where I kind of wrote something as a cathartic thing. And then I just met so many people from all walks of life who were dealing with a similar thing. And then I showed it to my friends and they're like, this is really good. We should make this. And then hospice, my dad was like kind of long-term hospice, but at home where my sister and I cared for him. And so hospice has a thing where they give caregivers like a reprieve. So you can have your parent at a facility for a few days to give the caregiver a break. So while my dad was at the facility, I shot the short film. And so it was interesting for me to write that based on like the main character was like a combination of me and my sister, and then the various people that I met, because I would meet people, whether it was at the rehab center or even getting my nails done, or like, it was just, so I was able to craft a character and a story based on real things, but it didn't have to be exact. And then I could make things a little bit like, I could expound on them for like narrative purposes, like dramatic or comedic purposes, So there's been something liberating about taking a true story or combining people's, where again, my journalism background is very much like, if you do a documentary, it's got to be, this is really what happened. And this is really what the person's saying, and you're not manipulating it. So with and people thought when they started watching the film initially, like, oh, is this a documentary? Because it felt very like cinema verite, like you're saying. And then with the short film that's at Bend now, Burros, we shot it on a Native American reservation, the Tohono O'odham nation that has land in Arizona and Mexico. And what's so interesting is that director came to me because my short film that I was telling you about played the festival circuit with his short film. And then he followed my producing career. And he's like, I've been following you. I love the movies you're making. I've got this short film. I'd love for you to produce it. And he kind of wanted to make a feature film, but start like with a short film, and knowing that we'd have to do a short, like in terms of like the development, because we needed to spend time on the nation and really meet the people. Like you couldn't just do a short film based there unless you really spent time there and got to know the community. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating, so interesting, so needed, like the perspective of what's happening at the border, with the US and Mexico, that's splitting this sovereign nation, and US policy at the border and how it's affecting it. And so I used my journalism skills in digging and getting, because it's not easy to film there. We had to pitch the film in front of the community, and they had to vote whether we were going to do it or not. And then we spent time there and got to know people and everything. And it was a beautiful experience. But again, he wrote the story from the perspective of two 6-year-old girls, one who was Tohono O'odham and spoke Tohono O'odham in English, and one a Hispanic migrant who got separated from her father, who only spoke Spanish. But we were able to tell a story of what's really happening in that nation from this child's point of view, which is interesting and unique. And he crafted a story of like two girls that kind of like are so different, but want to play and are not really noticing what's going on in the background. So again, it's that kind of freedom with narrative, but really still telling stories that need to be told or shedding light on something real and truthful. And we incorporated some things in the story, like he did a bunch of research, but then we incorporated some things that we learned from just spending time there. And then all of the stories from the that we learned there are incorporated into the feature that we want to do that's set in that world,
Mm-hmm. So it's very interlinked, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Was that your experience, Shauna?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking I actually, so the first film I directed was a documentary in Africa that is still airing on like Malawian television. It's about a homegrown peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy. But I don't see I love documentary, and I have so much, I think documentary right now in our time is so important as a truth telling. I heard both, like the word truth come up multiple times. And I think it's so important. I'm not a documentary filmmaker, and The Falconer, although it's inspired by this true story, it's about, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's about these two best friends. One of them's this privileged Westerner, and the other is this poor Omani son of a beekeeper, and they work at the zoo together united by like their love for animals, and their relationship gets really complicated when they decide to start stealing animals from the zoo to sell, to raise money to get Tarek, the Omani kid's sister, a divorce from this abusive marriage. And it's based on this true story, inspired by these two best friends. We had both of the real life characters on set. It's the story from Yemen, and we were able to like smuggle the Yemeni guy out. They were reunited for the first time after 7 years. But the movie we made, and the movie that we wrote, and the movie that we developed is a fable. It's not a true life story. It's inspired by it, but it's this larger than life, like there's a one-armed fisherman who's an animal smuggler, and it's all about the like these core human truths. And I think that as a storyteller, I see myself again, I get roped into documentary because I'm passionate about other people telling documentary stories, but that's not my medium. My medium is narrative. And the reason my medium is narrative is that I want to be 10 degrees, maybe 5 degrees out of our world in every single story I tell. So The Falconer it's a fairy tale, it's a fable, it's this like myth of friendship, and it's got that summer in a bottle feeling of what it means to love someone but then leave them, and like loss and reconciliation and betrayal. And we had 46 animals on set, and like we trained a wild falcon that like we released after the end of the movie. And so there's all of this stuff that's like, it's fairy tale stuff. It's not, I mean, it's bigger than life. And I think for me, the next project I'm working on right now is a narrative feature that's inspired by my childhood in Germany and takes place in this castle, but there's this ghost king, and it's this reconciliation story between a mother and a daughter after the mother has attempted suicide. And it's this idea of how do you bring someone back from the brink when there are forces at work that are so much larger than your own, the things that you like. People that love the script people keep saying it's like Lady Bird and Pan's Labyrinth. And that's those are the stories I personally want to tell, because I get to say things about our world that I wouldn't get to say if I was living purely in the factual. So like, I want to make Her like a story where, like that, like they're just like, they're in our world, but they're just a little outside of it. So I can say things that are just either maybe sometimes sweeter than things I get to say when I'm just talking about the truth, that like are maybe a little bit more hopeful or a little bit more aspirational, or are sometimes a little bit more hard or pointed than I kind of get to take that truth and I get to like go like one more deep. And so that's why I live in narrative, but I'm always inspired by true stories. Like I've never not told a story that, wait, that's a lot of negatives. I always tell stories that are, because I believe that we need more nuanced and authentic stories, and that when you take emotional shortcuts or you traffic in stereotypes, I believe that that's where storytellers are culpable for where we are in the world, and that we owe it to our audiences to truly dig deep and look for authenticity and tell those most true emotional core stories. And I think that's why documentary is so important. And I hope that I always have that same fidelity to stories that documentary filmmakers have. So you all inspire me a ton. Like I want to be a better storyteller because of the type of work that you all do.
And not that like documentaries aren't visually stunning, because
oh my gosh, no, they're the best.
But to me, it made me just think when you were talking about is how like some of the stuff also too that I've got like on my plate for the future, or that I'm currently working on and developing, is again, like one thing is based on a real group, like musical group, but the way we're approaching it is telling it visually in a very surrealistic way. So again, it's just for me, I think that's what I respond to, like, okay, your approach to filming it can be in a trippy way or a very abstract way or a different way. I'm stimulated by that visual, like how visually are we going to tell this story, and let's really push boundaries or push ourselves. And I feel like comfortable in the narrative world being able to do that, if that makes sense.
Right. And I'm curious about how you I'm sure you have a ton of different projects, and you have had a couple of projects going before you made the films that you made and we're showing at Bend Film. How did you pick this one? Was it like a matter of how personal it was, how urgent it was, like more of a coming from like a more of an emotional, psychological place? Or was it simply cheaper to make, easier and more practical to make? Maybe it's a matter of access, you know, like, oh, I have access to these people now, so I should seize this opportunity. I'm kind of curious about how, you know, you've got like this mass of stuff that you could be doing, and then it ends up being this particular gem. You know, how does that journey take?
I was like developing a gazillion different ideas, and I just landed at the Young Turks, and then somebody told me the story about how they had access to this lawyer in Florida. And they're like, there's this lawyer in Florida. He's been wanting us to do a film about this Oxycontin thing for like, I don't know, since 2016. And for me personally, I have a lot of family and friends that have been, you know, touched by the opioids epidemic. And so I was like instantly drawn to that story. And so then I go about my business and I start just like having coffees with different filmmakers. And I'm having breakfast with Brendan Fitzgerald, he's just left Feist, and he's like, I really want to do this idea about the Sacklers and, Farmer and Purdue. And I was like, whoa, stop. Like, if we want to talk about this some more, let's get it let's talk. Do you want to work together? Because that's what I'm developing. It was just like, I was developing it because we had this conversation, and then I had this conversation. He leaves that breakfast. He has 3 more conversations that just like, pow, 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 pow. And all of a sudden he's got his entire, we call them the Boston boys, but the drug dealers like on lockdown. I've got this lawyer on lockdown, and we have all this access to these stories. And so we just, now we have something, right? So let's get some money together to go film, and let's figure this out. We go do that. And then it sits on a shelf because I go have a baby, and nobody wants to do opioids, and everybody's got an opioid thing, which is why we're having a hard time selling it, but whatever. But like, and then I come back from having a baby, and then, like it's the same thing. It's like a conversation here, it's a coffee here, it's a meeting here. And suddenly I have $500,000 to make a movie. Right. And it's like, let's go, let's do this, let's figure this out. And so for me, that was the way that the Oxy Kingpins came to be, and not the Bitcoin story that I was developing, or, the story about, feminism and women and healthcare. Like those pieces didn't just drop in my lap.
You should definitely pursue the Bitcoin thing. That's very fascinating. That would make a great
blockchain for social good, right? Like, how do we use the blockchain for social good? Anyways, yeah.
I'm going to jump in and just say, I have to correct something I said earlier. I did work with a producer in the last year of I Was a Teenage Feminist. I worked with a real life producer who I met through the doc forum at Hot Docs. And she just let me spend all my time working with the editor, basically, and that was really awesome. So I did have that experience for a year. It was great. I loved it.
While you are talking about this, you can continue with my next question. I am curious because I feel like your story is very personal. You're in your documentary, you're interviewing yourself, if that's a thing, but you're on camera talking about the issues that you're bringing up. Was that the biggest impetus for you? Like, this is really important. I have to like say this out loud to people already, because there's just so much of that like angst to kind of say, come on, people, like, look at this situation. And it has so much humor and a storyline. So I felt like watching your film, it kind of does have like a narrative feel to it, because it kind of just unwinds like a narrative film, and there is a story there. So tell me about like how you picked that particular subject matter and you went with it.
Well, I think you're right. When we were talking about documentary versus narrative and how much true overlap there is, because we're all essentially telling stories in different ways. So yeah, I mean, I think that the figuring out the narrative, I guess, in my process happens in the editing room mostly. Like I can kind of guess or make up a storyline for funders, or I'm just making it up really. I don't know what's going to happen. And then when we're editing, we're finally like sort of shaping this into a coherent story. And you know, we lose things that we love, and then we discover new things that go in. And but this story, look, documentary filmmaking, filmmaking in general, it is so hard. I'm trying not to swear. It's really, really hard. It's a lot. It's hard work. I want to write myself a letter when I finish a film every time and say, this was really hard. Don't do this anymore. Do something easier and you can make more money. I keep feeling like I have to tell myself this. But what happens is that something gets a hold of me and I can't help it. And then I have to like talk about it. And, you know, my films really do look at certain different aspects of womanhood, let's say, that we make a lot of assumptions about, and that we are raised to believe certain things. And my last film was about virginity and female sexuality. So this film, which is about women who choose not to have children, well, it's me, like it's my whole life, but I never talked about it because it was very stigmatized. And I even assumed I would have children because everyone has children, it seemed to me. And that was just sort of this inevitability I had to just get ready for. You know, somehow I didn't, probably because I didn't have like the best relationships that led down that road. And so I didn't have children. And then I reminded myself, yeah, that's what you were planning to do. So you're good. You won. You're doing what you're doing. And I want to say in the like around 2015 or so, I noticed people talking about this sort of suddenly on social media, like a real outpouring of storytelling around this. And I thought, oh, maybe it's time to do this now. Maybe I can talk about it, and maybe people feel like this is something that's happening. And I did a survey. Asking people about their experiences not having children. And I posted it on Facebook like once. Here's the survey, please take it. And I thought, you know, maybe like 20 of my friends would take the survey. So a week later, I had 1,900 responses from people, like 1,900 responses, which was a little scary. But also I was thinking, wow, I guess this is a film then. I'm gonna make this film. And people were writing like, I really want to talk about this, no one's talking about it. And so that seemed to me like, okay, this is a good road to go down now. And then the more I worked on the film, the more I discovered, and the more, even more interesting it became. And that's usually what happens for me is the further I go down the road, the more fascinating it is. And because it's so hard to make a documentary, I have to be working on something I'm absolutely obsessed with. Because if I'm not obsessed with it, I'm not going to finish it. You know, like, how else are you going to get through it? You have to be really obsessed with whatever you're working on to give you the passion and energy, you know, to see it through. Yeah. So that's kind of how it all sort of came together. And now I'm already thinking about my next documentary, which I hate myself for. I don't. Anyway, I'll be dealing with that. But
did you tear up your letter? It's out the window.
I never wrote it. I never wrote the letter. I just finished this film, and I'm already thinking about the film I want to make next. So
very cool.
I'm really glad that you are, because I haven't seen your film yet, and now I'm like dying to go watch it and watch your entire canon of work. I think that the topics and the issues that you're wrestling with are so relevant, and I feel like choosing to allow yourself to be the center of the conversation is just, it's such a gift to other people. And I think, yeah, God, I hope that 20 years from now you make a movie about menopause, because nobody's talking about that.
That's what I'm doing next.
No way!
Really? Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think it's so, like, because I do not have premenopause. I'm not in the middle of menopause at all, but in my age group, all these women are having babies, and everyone's talking about birth, right? Or about those choices not to have children, but also about how none of us had people around us talking about how hard it is to give birth and what that process is. And that's a conversation that's just silenced, right? And I feel like choosing not to have children is a conversation that's been silenced. And in bringing this up, I have a lot of friends that are a little bit older, like 10, 20 years older than I am, that are going through menopause right now. And that is a topic that is utterly silenced. So thank you.
I do want to say, Therese, when I watched your film, I was thinking, I found it very reassuring for a woman like myself, and I have 2 children, but I kind of felt like, oh, I feel like every woman's freedom is as good as every other woman's freedom. So I was really moved by it. I was like, because what's the point in, feeling like, oh, I can have children and this is something that I'm doing and it's accepted, if another woman's choice of not doing that isn't equally accepted and embraced, so I found it really reaffirming for all women, regardless of their choices. I just wanted to say that.
I know. I want to jump in and just say, I want to watch your entire canon of work, and I want to talk to you about my next idea for the film that I want to direct, which is totally along these lines.
Excellent.
I know.
That's great.
Really?
It's so funny. It's so true, because I'm echoing everyone's sentiments too. Super excited. And the stuff that I actually write, I really am focused on women's stories, all the perspectives you never see. Even if it's like a fictional narrative, I'm always trying to import topics of conversation involving, like you're saying, sexuality, menopause, having periods, like what it's like to be a woman in various facets when we don't talk about, and that's super important to me. So I'm super excited, and I can't wait to watch your body work and continue this conversation after this little Zoom thing. I want all these women, we have to continue.
I know, we'll have to stay on for the rest
we'll
of the
have to
afternoon.
have several Zoom follow-ups. Let's do a monthly Zoom conversation.
I'm in.
Amazing.
Kurt probably stopped recording right now. I'm kidding. No, you didn't.
But I will say real quickly, just because I didn't mention anything about 7 days, and I would love to, since it's playing at the festival, and again, going back to the mentors conversation, is that, so I did a producing lab with Film Independent years ago, and my mentor was Mel Eslin, who's president of Duplass Brothers Productions. She was amazing. We really bonded. So in addition to kind of mentoring, we got to be friends. And then we were always kind of looking for a project to do together. And then on top of that, I really have a special place in my heart for Duplass Brothers Productions, since they are multi-hyphenates and they support, emerging filmmakers. And for me, I've always been told, don't tell people you act or you also write or direct. Just say you're a producer, because it takes away from that. And I'd be like, but I'm all these things. I'm a storyteller. And I'm like, I'm sure if I was a man, I could say that I did it all. And if I'm super successful, and I would sit there and go, why can Mark and Jay Duplass do it all, And so Mel reached out to me in July of 2020, saying she had a project. She's like, I don't know where you're at, because again, July 2020, it was hardcore COVID. And she's like, but I've got this special project. I don't know, I'm not sure what you're thinking as far as producing, but it's a unique project. The writers, directors, and the actors, so it's a couple. They're Indian. They're creative and life partners. And so Roshan Sethi and Karan Soni wrote it together. Then Roshan Sethi was directing it, and Karan Soni was acting in it. And very authentic. And it was a romantic comedy, but very specific with Indian culture. And so I love the specificity, and I learned about things that I didn't know, but I love that it was taking a normal romantic comedy, but had a really specific POV. And then the fact that they're a gay Indian couple that are doing this, I thought this was amazing. And then Roshan Sethi is also a Harvard MD. So when it was okay, I'm going to jump into producing something during COVID, I'm going to feel really safe with a doctor as the director. And so that was another thing, a little kind of thing that made me okay, this is something that I should really step out of kind of comfort zone, being isolated during COVID, to then jump into the waters of filming during a big pandemic, And I love the story and the filmmakers, and they're two of my best friends now. And working with Duplass was amazing, and I knew it would be an opportunity for the future.
And Shauna, tell us a little bit about how you came to decide on the Falconer as your main focus.
Oh man, I feel like it's always in this story because I don't have a scientific way to decide on my next project. I don't know how. I'm sure there are people that can do that. I had just finished producing, or I was producing the Lego movie, and I was kind of on the tail end, like the final year before we were, that was 7 years of my life in animation. And so I was on the tail end of it. I knew I was gonna put in my resignation and go back to writing and directing and kind of jump off that cliff. And I had been working on a novel and been working out of Adam's loft. And it was kind of like the place that I would go for like here an hour, there an hour to write. And Adam had been shooting a documentary in Yemen where he met the real life Kai and Tarek and came back with this story and was like, do you think this is, I think this is a movie. Do you think it's a movie? And it was kind of this moment of like, oh, we should tell this story together. And it has this, we're not co-directors or co-writers on like anything else that we're working on. I'm sure we'll collaborate in the future. He's one of my dearest friends. But he'd come back with this, and it was just that like heart thing of like, oh, this is a story that we need to tell, and it's a story we need to tell together. And I think it is kind of that, it's got that, yeah, it was just a way to have a conversation about gender and about really truly honoring all of these different true stories while telling a fairy tale about friendship. And for me, having grown up in Germany and the Middle East and England, I've oftentimes been, I grew up deeply aware of my privilege, where I have really dear friends that can't leave the countries that they're from, and I've lost people in countries where there are wars being fought. And I think for me, the story of Kai in a lot of ways is my own interrogation of my own privilege, and being that person that can come and go, and sometimes overlooking, sometimes my set of the way I see the world because of my privilege is in juxtaposition to the utter truth of someone else's experience in their environment. And both of those stories can be true in the Falcon. I'm like, oh, I don't want to ruin the movie for all of you, but is Kai's stolen this falcon from the zoo and training it to set it free, because falcons are some of the only animals that are bred in captivity that can be trained to then be released back like into the wild. And so he's training this falcon with this goal of setting it free before he goes to university and to study animal conservation. And he's coming from that place. And Tarek, is working at the zoo long hours every day to put rice on the table for his family who doesn't have anything. And when they fail to raise enough money to buy his sister this divorce, he ends up making a set of decisions that in some ways betrays their friendship, but also honors their friendship, right? And it's this really, it's an interrogation of privilege, and it's complicated. And so I think for me, every story I tell is an opportunity for me to live with and unpack something I struggle with, like my mom's depression with Alona, my next project. She's someone who struggled with depression, was on the brink of suicide, is thriving now, like is like really truly, like she's like one of those people in life that I just look up to more than almost anyone else, who's like rebuilt her life. But then being a young woman and struggling with depression myself and being like, oh man, am I just like her? Is that my future? How do I own who I am with my superpowers and my strengths and not be washed out to sea? And like, can I believe that the sun is always going to rise? So for me, every project I work on is about that. Like my next project that I always have a folder on my desktop with like baby projects is what I think of them as. And like, I just know that they're like 5 years from now, this will be my next project, but I'm dyslexic. So it's a story about disability and about about that in like a space of acceptance and like beauty and power and thinking differently as a superpower. So I feel like, and so that folder on my desktop, like I find things, I put articles in it, I put artwork in it. And like, it's like I'm packing this gift for myself that like my future self gets to like tear the like paper wrapping off of like on Sunday morning and or like on Christmas morning and be like, oh my gosh, there's this like treasure trove of ideas for this future project. So I have like 3 of those on my desktop at any given time, but I feel like The Falconer was just, it was the story that had to be told. And it's coming out at a time where I just think it's really timely. I think we've told really reductionist stories about the Middle East. And our goal in telling this movie was to make a movie from the region and not about the region. And so it really was working with the real life Kai and Tarek, we set it in a very specific tiny little village in Oman, and like the women in the wedding scene, when you all watch it, are like, those are the real women in that village that plan weddings. Like they planned that wedding with us. And on set that night, when we were all there, is like, we opened up that dialogue and said, you know, like, will it's be in conversation even throughout the shoot. Like if we need to pause the shoot tonight to talk about how something's being represented, we'll make space for that. And like on 2 different occasions throughout that shoot, like it was a night shoot, we like shut everything down for like 20 minutes to like talk about like, how do prayers work? Like where does this live? How does this live? And creating that kind of a dialogue as a learner. I think I always want to put myself as a storyteller into places where I can be a learner to wrestle with my own questions in life. So I don't know. I pick my next projects because they call me.
I love that you guys all touched on your next projects, because I was going to ask that anyway, and we've already run out of time, but I'm going to go for one more question because, oh, by the way, though, Shauna, my next screenplay that I'm writing is also about depression. So there's like a crossover in all of our projects, I think. So
I
that's
want to hear
wonderful.
about it because it's so hard. I think we need more stories about it. Because
I will write an email
Please
to my
do.
Zoom link email to all of you guys, and we can all exchange ideas to our heart's content. But my next question, and it will need to be like pretty concise answers, but like bite-sized answers. I'm really curious. What are your approach to, I guess, like getting a project off the ground? Like, do you wait to fundraise to make as much of what you're envisioning as possible? Or do you just kind of like go for it and say, we'll wing it and we'll figure it out along the way, just so you start something and you gain momentum? You know, I'm kind of curious about, when is a project for you mature enough, and what are the biggest, I don't know, like, do you want to assign some talent, like some known names to make that? Because there are so many different decisions that you could make that will unlock something, you know? What are like what do you wait for, I guess, in some way? Like, what is it like, I've got this, now is go time? Or like, no, I got to be patient and give this project the biggest chance? I know this was such a long question and I'm expecting you to give me bite-sized answer, but go for it.
I guess I'll just quickly say, because that is it would be a big answer, but I just always try to come from a place of not fear and look at each project as a journey. And so as long as I'm moving forward on it, I just try to have faith that the right things will happen at the right time, because every project is so different. And I kind of have a mentality, let's shoot for the stars, but be realistic about, okay, because I'm somebody that is more of a doer than a talker. So I would rather make something than wait around. But I guess my whole thing is, what I would say is just looking at it as like a journey. Every project is a journey, not having fear, and just having faith in the process. That's my quick general answer.
Thank you.
Andrea,
you're muted.
I would say both.
Oh, sorry. You'll say both.
I would say both. Like for me, like I know that there's a lot in there, but to me, it's like to piggyback on what you're saying. Like, yes, we have to keep going. We have to keep moving. But at the same time, I think I really am a producer in the sense that, like, I'm producing with someone. I came on as a producer to a director who's been filming for 10 years, right? And she's been self-funding. And I want to get her some money so that we can hire an editor, so that we can, and I'm like, stop shooting, like, so I'm like, we have to just stop and see what we have and, fundraise. Then there's another project where it's like, I just want to put this all together on paper and then try to make all the things happen. And that, so it's like, to me, it goes anyway, and each project is its own thing and has its own lifetime. And yes, faith.
Timeline too. Yeah. Therese, you were saying
something. I just start working on it. There's a research phase actually, which I think I'm going to get into soon with this new thing. There's a research phase, and then I just start, because I know that, how am I going to raise funds? I'm going to have a Kickstarter to start with, and my films don't really get a lot of grants. I just don't make the kind of films that, boards of grants want to fund, to be perfectly honest. But I start shooting. I shoot enough that I can make a nice trailer. I've already got my social media account set up, building the audience.
so you go for a crowdfunding phase from what you have gathered?
Yeah, I go for a crowdfunding phase, and then as I raise money, I work on it. Our Kickstarter funded a lot of the production, a lot of the shooting and traveling and shooting, and then I did get a really huge grant from the Canada Council for the Arts, which paid for part of the editing. But we had a huge gap. I think for 9 months, we didn't do anything. Like, it was just, we couldn't do a thing because we had no funding left. So I start and stop and yeah. But I'm not really waiting for anything if I don't have to wait.
Shauna?
I think I'll be brief, but I think it's a really tough question. Like on Alona, I've been writing it for like 4 years. So I'm many drafts in at this point. I think I'm really close to a draft where I'm going to go and start trying to put together the team. I'm looking for like a really strong female producer for it. So but I feel really comfortable, and this is probably my producing background talking. I feel really comfortable doing years and years of free work as a writer and as a producer. I feel really uncomfortable asking crews to do free work for me. And I feel like right now with the IATSE strike, I think that the way in which we've gone about making movies for so long has been so harmful to so many people, of the like, I'm just going to grind it out. And I don't know how to shift the entire narrative right now. My like the level of gratitude and solidarity that I have around the strike right now is so profound, because I feel like it's such a grassroots moment where people are taking a stand for our entire industry to ensure that even those of us who like work for like 5, 10, 20 years on something for free, that like we're shifting the narrative around creativity and money and compensation. And I'm really, really, really grateful for that. And it's something that like I've tried to do for my crews to like take care of people. But it's not something you can do from the top down. It truly has to be like a ground up, like we're all worthy kind of moment. So I'm so grateful for that. But it's something I struggle with on every single project. I hate asking for work on spec. But also in film, nothing gets going without like without it already moving. And so that's why I'm like, I don't have a clear answer, because everything I've ever done, like Adam's, because of Adam's documentary background, we were able to do things on the Falconer that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. Because of my producerial background and my writing background, we were able to do things that like otherwise we never could have done. So I don't know. I feel like that's a terrible answer, but it's tough right now in our business. And I want to be part of rewriting how work is done and how people are compensated. and I don't have a solution yet. I mainly feel like there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Wow. On that note, we're going
It's
to
a terrible note to end on.
There are problems. It's very sad. I was hoping for like some upbeat answer to end on.
Well, I have an upbeat answer. Not an answer, not at all. But again, at least that we're having this discussion. Like the fact that, talking about the IATSE strike, or I'm involved with a group that's creating like a producers union, because even though we have like the PGA, they don't for producers. And, independent film relies on independent producers, and it's so tough. So at least the positive is we're having the conversation now, or we're having dialogue about it, the problem. So that's a positive.
Yes. Amen to that. That's the framing. Thank you.
And let's keep doing it. And I'm so glad that Bend Film is a part of this movement in the right direction, and including all of you guys in the lineup with your wonderful films and being able to share that with our audiences. I can't wait to watch all of your projects that you mentioned and the ones you didn't mention. And I thank all of the Bend Film audience watching, tuning in. Best of luck with your projects, and I hope to see you again soon, hopefully in person.
So much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Meet everyone. Let's email and stay.
Yes.
Email.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.